So I put out a video yesterday or even today, depends on the time this goes out, asking a very specific question. Are women morally superior to men? Now, it isn't a question I invented. It's a question that I actually have received, and I decided to answer it, think it through publicly. And it regularly also appears in my comments. Now, the response has been fascinating. Not because people disagreed with me. I expected disagreement. In fact, I've said many times on this platform and others that disagreement sharpens thinking. At least it does sharpen mine. What fascinated me was something else, though. Many people responded to arguments I never actually made. And I think there's a much bigger lesson here that I teach inside of my programs. I went back and I actually read the transcript from that video word for word, because even I was curious after seeing the comments about what I actually said. I reread the transcript because that matters in terms of the accuracy of what was actually said. And here's what I actually said, okay? I said women are structurally oppressed. I acknowledge that. I said patriarchy exists. I acknowledge that. I said men have historically held greater structural power, and I mentioned politically, legally, I think the military, economically, religious, etc. I said women deserve dignity. I said that men deserve dignity. I said that human beings have the capacity for extraordinarily good and extraordinary harm. I said that structural oppression and moral superiority are two different claims, okay? And I argued that throughout all of that, human nature still matters. Now, here's what I did not say. I didn't say patriarchy isn't real. I didn't say feminism is wrong or irrelevant. I did not say women are as violent as men. I did not say that structural inequality does not matter or contribute to or shape behavior in some way or another. I did not say misogyny doesn't exist. I did not say, of course, that women shouldn't have rights or that women need to be perfect or that we need to be seeking a perfect society for it to be legitimate. Those are completely different arguments to the question, the original question I posed. Okay, now you can absolutely disagree with me and my conclusions, by the way. You can disagree with my reasoning. You can think I'm wrong. That is completely legitimate. But what we have to generally disagree on is with what was actually said. Okay, not with an argument that was never even made or conclusions I did not reach in the video itself. Because something else began to happen in the comments that I think deserves a mention. And it's what I call interpretive dominance. Now, this is an invisible contract that assumes that because of disagreement, as a result of disagreement, it gives a person the authority to define somebody else's motives, psychology, identity, or their lived experience, instead of engaging with the tenets of what was actually said. I'm going to read that again. Interpretive dominance, and I reject this. All right? It is the invisible contract that because you disagree with someone, it gives you the authority to define somebody else's motives, identity, psychology, and or their lived reality. And what you do is you hone in on that instead of engaging with what was actually said. Now, this doesn't just apply to conversations around feminism and women's lives. It applies in medicine, religion, race conversations, politics, we see that happen, the workplace, families, okay, intimate relationships, social media, and leadership. Notice the difference though, because instead of responding to what I actually said and the question that was posed, people began explaining why I supposedly said it and started responding to arguments and conclusions I never made in the video. Apparently, I have unresolved trauma. I have issues with my mother, which is new to me, by the way. I need therapy. I'm bitter. Because of my former religion, I hold these views. Now, I ask one simple question. What evidence was presented based on what I actually said that any of those claims are true? None. I don't object to disagreement. I object to replacing what I actually said with psychological speculation. Because once we stop responding to what people actually say, especially in public conversation, the whole thing begins to collapse. It becomes performative, actually, rather than genuine inquiry. Now, another point kept kind of appearing repeatedly. People suggesting that because I don't identify myself as a feminist, that is not a label that I adopted, especially throughout my former life. My work somehow lacks legitimacy. Let's be very clear here. I have never said that feminist scholarship and literature does not matter or has no value. I never said feminist theory should not be read. In fact, I never said I haven't studied feminist theory. I graciously shared some of the reasons around why I don't necessarily label myself, or haven't done in the past at least, as a feminist. Now, what I object or reject about this is very narrow here, right? Is that I reject the idea that feminist theory is the only legitimate starting point for asking questions about women's lives. Because that's all I did, is I posed a question as somebody who thinks publicly. Okay, many intellectual traditions help us to understand women, not just feminism, history, psychology, anthropology, economics, evolutionary biology, and feminist scholarship. None of them own the conversation or own what I, as an individual adult, can ask, can explore, and can think. Okay? No intellectual tradition has a monopoly on asking questions about women. And my legitimacy as a thinker does not come from adopting one ideological label. Okay? It comes from the quality of my thinking. Yeah, my willingness to revise my views if the evidence changes. Yeah, my honesty, my integrity. Now, let's be very clear here as well. The Unpunishable Woman does not insist on always being right. Okay, she does, though, insist on remaining the primary author of her own thoughts. The Unpunishable Woman is the primary author of her own thoughts. And that is what relocation of authority looks like. Okay, it means I don't need permission to ask questions. I don't need permission to think publicly. I don't need permission to revise my thinking if new evidence emerges or I find new evidence. Now, this isn't arrogance, by the way. It's intellectual responsibility, okay? And as I said, it's relocation of authority. Finally, there is one other thing I want to say very clearly, okay? There are very few things that I draw the line on in public conversation. But one of them is this: speculating publicly about another person's mental health, psychological state, or private life without evidence. That is unacceptable. And it's not because mental health carries shame. It shouldn't, and in my view, it doesn't. But it's because assigning psychological motives to someone you've never met is a way of undermining their credibility without engaging with their ideas on top of that. Okay? Ironically, many women know exactly what that feels like. Women have spent generations being told that they imagine things, that they're too emotional, too sensitive, hysterical, unstable, that they cannot trust their own perception of reality, which is precisely why I will not allow that pattern to become normal or a culture of that behavior in this community. You are free to disagree with me. No problem there. You're free to challenge every conclusion I make, as long as it really is the conclusion I made. And in fact, you can tell me exactly where you think I'm wrong. That is also fine. But you are not entitled to invent my motives or state of mind. You're not entitled to replace what I actually said with speculation. Because disagreement isn't really the enemy of public thinking. I think misrepresentation is one of them. And when you stop responding to what people have actually said, it's no longer a conversation. Because we're essentially inventing things. That's what we're doing. I'll see you in the next video.